Hi, hello. This is Jove Aguas, and welcome once again to our lectures in ethics. So this is now a continuation of our fifth lecture, and this is the second part of the lecture on the different types of ethical theories. In the previous lecture, we talked about the teleological theories. So in this second part of our lecture, we will be talking about the ontological theories. Okay, so first, what is the ontology? Well, the term the ontology was taken from the Greek term deon, that's Deon, which means duty. Okay? Now, in ethics, when you say the ontological theory, uh, in contrast to the teleological, which bases the morality of the act on certain consequences, in the ontological theory, the basis of the morality of the act is a set of rules or laws, right? So, and of course, these laws or rules may come from a divine being, may come from nature, or may come from the society. So, an act is moral if it conforms to certain rules. Of course, the rules or the laws prescribe certain duties. So if your duty is in accord or your action is in accord with certain duties based on rules, then your action is right or your action is good, right? So, here in the ontology or a theory of this nature denies what a teleological theory affirms. It affirms that the right or the obligatory or the good act is not always dependent on certain non moral value produced by the act or the outcome of an action or a rule. And that's the point of teleological. We base the morality of a certain action on its consequences, on the result or the outcome of that action, right? So here, um, it is dependent for the ontology, it is dependent on other considerations other than the outcome. Like, as already mentioned, a command, a rule, a law, either by God or by state or by a society. Right? So, the first theory under the ontological theory is the divine command theory. Okay, divine command. So, a divine command theory bases the morality of an action, the rightness of an action, on the law established by God. So it's called divine command, the command of God. So God either establishes a general moral principle or laws and standards and prescribes and prohibits certain actions. So an action is good or right if it conforms to these laws given by God, if it follows the prescriptions and the prohibitions of the divine being. One example, of course, of this is the Ten Commandments. Okay, so the Ten Commandments is a command, precepts, laws given by God to man through Moses. And of course, the laws or the precepts that we find in the Holy Quran are also considered part of the divine command theory. Okay, so in the divine command theory, morality is ultimately based on the commands or the character of God, and that the morally right action is the one that God commands or requires. Now, the specific content of these divine commands may vary depending on the particular religion and depending on the particular view of the individual command, divine command theorist. Right? So, for example, as I've said, there's a difference between the divine commands taught by, for example, by Judaism and Islam and Christianity. Of course, they come from the same roots, but of course, there will be differences in particular commands. Right. But the common thing is that all these commands come from God. God is the author of the law. Okay. Now, the second is the natural law theory. We have already discussed in the previous lecture about the difference between the eternal law, the divine law, and the natural law. Okay, and we have said that the natural law is that aspect of the eternal law that we can understand based on our reason. All right, because we cannot understand totally comprehend the mind of God, so we cannot totally comprehend the eternal law. But the divine law is that part of the law of God that we can understand using our human reason. Okay, and we have said that when the natural law talks about morality of human action, then we call that the natural moral law. Okay, so according to the natural law theory, the morality or moral exists, the moral standard exists in the very fabric of nature or fabric or nature of the universe. So an action is right if it conforms to these natural moral laws. Of course, you're going to ask, uh, what are these natural moral laws? Now, well, one particular example is respect for human life, okay, or respect for the natural flow of things. Okay, so of course, self-preservation is part of the moral standard of nature that we have to preserve ourselves, or that we have to preserve, respect life, and therefore killing will always be against the natural moral laws. So the natural law theory prohibits killing of human persons. Okay? So, well, to be more specific, when you say natural moral law, as we have said, it's part or derived from the eternal law. So we recognize God as the giver of the natural law. Okay? And man is the recipient of the natural law. Man can understand the natural law because he has reason. So the natural law constitutes the principles of practical rationality. Practical rationality, meaning our reason. Meaning these are the principles by which human action must be judged as reasonable or unreasonable. All right. So, question: is it reasonable to kill people? To kill, for example, somebody, okay, without without any justification, for example? It is against the natural law because it is unreasonable to kill. Okay. Now, according to Saint Thomas, the natural law is the way that the human being participates in the eternal law. We participate in the eternal law precisely because we have reason, we have rationality. God created us in His own image and likeness, and part of being like God is that, just like God, we have the capacity to reason. All right, we have the capacity to reason. Of course, we cannot. Our reason is not comparable to God. Okay, that's why we just participate. Participate is to take part, no? Meaning we don't we don't take the whole thing, no, but there's just a segment. No? So our reason is just a part, okay, of the divine reason. Okay, so the precepts of the natural law are universally binding by nature, and that the precepts of the natural law are universally knowable by nature. Why is it binding by nature? Well, because by nature, all people, all men are reasonable, rational. Of course, some people, they cannot exercise the full extent of their reason or rationality, but it doesn't mean that they don't have reason at all. All of us are rational. Okay, so as rational human beings, we acknowledge the universality of the natural law. Okay. Now, let's go to the third, the natural rights theory. Okay. Now, the natural rights theory recognizes that as human beings, we have certain basic rights. All right. Certain basic rights. So these are rights given to us by nature. When we were born, right, as human beings, we already have these natural basic rights. Okay, as human being. Okay, so these rights as human being are universal rights. All right, they are inalienable from the human person, meaning we cannot take them away from from the human person because they are inherent in the human person as a human being. Nobody can take away these rights. Now, what are these rights? There are three basic rights: the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. Okay? So when you say natural rights, they are not rights given by the state. All right? Before the state was established, there are human individuals. You see? Before governments, the states were organized, there were already human individuals. And as human individuals, they already enjoy these basic natural rights. They were not given by the society. They were not given by the state. And therefore, the state cannot just take away our right to life or our property or our liberty without any process or due process. Okay? So that's the point. No? As human beings, we enjoy all these natural rights. Now, if our actions will uh, violate these natural rights, then our that particular action is immoral or evil. So any action that respect these basic rights is a moral action. Right? Now, the next is the social contract theory. All right. So, what is the social contract? What is a social contract? I already mentioned that even before the establishment of the society or the state, there are already individuals. So, individuals living and existing independent from each other. They all enjoy the rights, all right? But the problem is that if they will live or exist independent from each other, there may be some conflicts. Because when I exercise my right, it may also infringe on the right of others. So, how do we assure, how do we guarantee that individual rights will be respected and protected and preserved? So, what happens was that these human individuals who were living independent from each other, just coexisting, they decided to form a society or to form the state, a civil society. They decided to group together, to bind together. Now, when they try to form a group, the state or the society, they have to agree on certain things. Okay, so let's form an organization, a society. Okay, now when you join the society or these groupings, you can no longer enjoy all the rights that you have. Well, you retain your natural rights, but the other rights you have to give up. Okay, in order for that, for the group to be able to form certain rules, and these rules will be binding to everybody. So that is the social contract theory. The individuals, they form a society and they agreed on certain rules or certain laws. So the rules or the laws are not from God, are not from nature, but it's a rule that they agreed upon. That's why it's called social contract. All right. So an action is right if it follows or conforms to these rules. All right. So rightness is a function of the rules and institutions established in a society. implicitly or explicitly agreed to by its members for the purpose of peaceful cooperation, harmonious coexistence, the preservation of their rights, etc., etc. All right. So if before people can do whatever they want to do because they are just living independent from each other, now if you join a society or a community, now you have to follow the rules, the laws, because these rules are part of the contract, okay, for peaceful cooperation and harmonious coexistence. So any act that violates these rules is bad or evil. And of course, actions that conform to these rules are considered to be morally right or good. Okay. So, in some ways, the agreement of all individuals subject to the collective enforce social arrangements shows that those arrangements have some normative property, meaning again normative, meaning it uh, it prescribes. Remember the norms, right? It prescribes, it commands, so they are legitimate. Okay, the rules must be legitimate. They are just, they're obligating, etc., etc. So if you're part of that group, you can say, well, I don't want to follow that. Well, if you don't want to follow that, then you better leave the group. You will no longer be considered as part of the society or of the institutions. Okay? So the members of some society have reason to endorse and comply with the fundamental social rules, the laws, the institutions, and or principles of that particular society. So if you're part of the society, you're duty bound to follow the rules. Okay? Now, if you don't want to follow the rules, well, you can always leave. You can always, uh, you know, leave the group. So, for example, in the class, there are certain rules in the class. Then you have to follow the rules because that's part of the agreement, okay, of the social contract. Now, let's go to the next categorical imperative. Okay, categorical imperative. This is actually a theory proposed by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant. You can find that in the handouts I gave you. Right. So morality can be summed up in an imperative. Again, what is an imperative? It is a command. Okay, imperative, a command. Okay, so it's an ultimate command of reason. And from this imperative, from this command of reason, all our duties and obligations are derived. Now, why call it categorical? Because it is absolute. It is an absolute command. It is an unconditional requirement that must be obeyed in all circumstances and is justified as an end in itself. Okay? So again, it's a command of reason. It's a command of reason. Okay? So our reason, so it's still connected to the natural law, but of course the because of the concept of reason. But here we recognize that we have reason, and our reason can understand or can formulate certain rules, certain commandments. Therefore, we have to follow those rules. Absolutely. Okay? Without any condition. So when you say categorical imperative, like for example, be honest. Be honest at all times. You cannot say, well, I'm going to be honest if. Now, if you say you're going to be honest if, then that means it's no longer categorical. It becomes a conditional imperative because you are imposing certain condition on following the command. Right? According to categorical imperative, there's no condition whatsoever. Okay? Now, who commands? Well, of course, as you've said, reason. And for Kant, he calls this the good will. And according to Manuel Kant, there's nothing good except a good will. And this will is the uniquely human capacity to act according to the concept of law or principles. Okay? Because there are many things that could be good for certain conditions. Like, for example, consider intelligence. Intelligence is good, right? But if you're going to use intelligence uh, with a bad will, then you're going to use intelligence for bad things. Okay, so we must have or we must follow the good will. Okay, so the moral principles require us to fulfill our duties. They are commands simply because these duties make valid claims on us. Okay, I'm going to explain this more in details in the other lectures on specific ethical theory. Right. So the unconditional moral principle commands that our behavior should be in accord with universalizable maxims which respect persons as an end in themselves. So, one of the formulations of the categorical imperative is that we should always respect human persons as an end in themselves, and that our obligations to do our duty must always be for the sake of its end, of itself, meaning we are doing our duty not because of something else, not because of certain consequence or result. You do your duty because it's your duty, because it's the right thing to do, not for some any other reason. Okay, so that is the point of Immanuel Kant. Now let's go to the next prima facie duties. Prima facie duties. This theory is actually sort of a continuation or support or related to the categorical imperative. Because the categorical imperative, as proposed by Kant, talks about duties, right? Well, of course, Kant mentioned certain categorical imperatives like respect for the human person, uh, or that we should do our duty, etc., etc. But it does not specify what are these duties. All right. So the prima facie duties tells us what are these duties. But the question is, what do you mean by prima facie? When we say prima facie, it means that it is self-evident. Self-evident. And what do I mean by self-evident? That on first sight, meaning first when you see it, you are already convinced that it is really such a duty. It does not need any proof, no, because it is self-evident, right? Self-evident. For example, say, what would be a self-evident? Well, you go out one you got in the morning and then you see the sun rising. Then you tell you, you say, well, is is rising, or the sun is out. That's prima facie because you can actually see it. You don't need a proof that the sun is shining, all right, or has risen. Of course, if you say the Earth is round, is that prima facie? Well, at first glance, it may not. It may look to be straight. So you will need some proof for that. So it's not really prima facie. But of course, because it's already common knowledge, it becomes now some sort of a prima facie. So what are these prima facie duty? These are obligatory duties. So for example, being faithful, fidelity, being faithful to other people. It's a prima facie. Do you need to explain why you have to be faithful, or why do you have to be loyal? No. It's a duty. It's a prima facie duty. It's a self-evident duty. Keeping promise. Like reparation. If you have done uh, something bad, what do you do? You apologize. Do you need to explain why you have to apologize when you hurt or offend other people? No. Okay. Apologizing is prima facie. Gratitude. Okay. You have to be grateful for the things that, well, we always, like for example, you receive a blessing, we receive a favor. What do? We say thank you. Do we need to explain? Do we need proof? Why do we have to be grateful? No, it's prima facie. Non-injury, that we should not cause harm on other people. It's prima facie. We really don't have to injure other people. Justice, being just, being fair to people, it's a prima facie duty. Do we need to explain? Do we need proof that we have to be just? No, it's prima facie. Self improvement, do we need proof that we have to improve ourselves? No, it's prima facie. So, for the prima facie duties, an action is good if it conforms to these duties. And if you violate all these duties and the other prima facie duties, then your action is evil. Right? All right. Now, let's go to the last one, virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is a theory that is based on the philosophies of Aristotle. I'm sure you know Aristotle. He is a Greek philosopher, one of the, well, the philosopher par excellence, and Confucius. And of course, you know Confucius, Chinese philosopher. According to the virtue ethics, morality should not just be based on a particular action. Like, for example, we talk about, well, uh, giving alms to the poor is good because, etc., etc. Corruption is evil because, etc., etc. According to virtue ethics, instead of talking about the morality of certain actions, particular actions, we should develop a character based on virtues. Okay, we have to develop certain traits, meaning good habits, virtues, and then if we have these virtues, then we can act virtuously. And by acting virtuously, meaning we act morally. Okay, so it's not you can talk about being just, an action is just or unjust. But if you don't have the character, if you don't have the traits, if you don't have the good the virtues, you will not act justly. So the point of the virtue ethics is that we have to develop good habits of character. Like, for example, benevolence, generosity, charity, justice, etc. Because if we acquire these virtues, like benevolence, charity, generosity, etc., then we will act morally according to those virtues. So if you develop the virtue of justice, you will always be just. If you develop the virtue of generosity or charity, then you'll always be generous and charitable. So for many, this is a good theory because it emphasizes on the total formation, moral formation of the person. There's no amount of no amount of understanding all the rules will help us to become good person if we don't develop the virtues. Okay, so those are all the ontological theories. Okay, I hope you gain some lessons here. You understand discussion, and uh, just to reinforce what we've said, here are some questions for discussion. So, one, do you think we should judge our actions based on the ontological consideration? Why? Second, what do you think is the most appropriate deontological theory that we can apply to abortion? Why? No? And the last one is, in considering who should get priority in medical care, what possible deontological theory can we apply? So those are some questions to, for further reflections and discussions. So thank you very much. This is a rather long lecture, but I hope you understand the discussion. All right. So thank you very much, and you wait for the third part of this